Aminu Kano was the son of an Islamic judge, born straight into the class of people northern Nigeria's emirate system was built to serve. He spent his entire adult life trying to tear that system down from the inside, organizing the region's poorest against the very aristocracy his own family belonged to. By the time he died, the taxes he'd spent decades fighting were gone, and a woman was on a Nigerian presidential ticket for the first time in the country's history, his own running mate. Aminu Kano was born August 9, 1920, in the Sudawa quarter of Kano City. His father, Malam Yusuf, was chief alkali, an Islamic judge, at the Kano court, from a scholarly Fulani clan known as the Jayanawa. Kano began with a Quranic education before moving through Shahusi Primary School and Kano Middle School. In 1937, he enrolled at Katsina College, graduating as a certified teacher in 1942. Kano began teaching at Bauchi Training College in 1942, and almost immediately started using his position to say things a colonial teacher wasn't supposed to say. He wrote a pamphlet titled, Kano, Under the Hammer of the Native Administration, a direct attack on how the region was governed. In 1943, alongside Saadu Zungar and a young Abubakar Tafawa Balewa, he co-founded the Bauchi General Improvement Union, which grew out of an earlier discussion group whose activities colonial authorities had already moved to restrict after Kano's public criticism of indirect rule. In September 1946, Kano was one of 7 Nigerian teachers awarded a scholarship to study for a year at the University of London's Institute of Education. He came back in 1947 with a professional education certificate and a deeper exposure to political and socialist thought than almost anyone else in his position had access to. In March 1948, he formed the Northern Teachers Association, the first labor union of any kind in northern Nigeria, and aware of how the colonial government treated known radicals, installed more conservative figures as its public-facing officers to shield it from a crackdown. While posted to Sokoto, Kano joined Jamiyar Mutanen Erwa, a Northern cultural association that would eventually become the Northern People's Congress. Colonial pressure had already forced him to give up teaching by this point. In 1950, he led a group of young radicals out of that association entirely, forming the Northern Elements Progressive Union. NEPA's founding language was blunt. Northern society was governed by what it called family compact rule, and the antagonism between the native administration and the ordinary Talakawa, the common people, amounted to nothing less than a class struggle. NEPA's founding manifesto argued that real reform meant transforming the North's autocratic institutions into democratic ones, controlled by the Talakawa themselves. When a colonial district officer cautioned NEPA's members to move slowly, telling them one has to learn to walk before one can run, Kano's reply became one of the defining lines of his political career, that they would not walk, that they would run, and if they fell, they would get back up and run again, and that the British had better not try telling them how fast. In the 1951 Kano elections, NEPA won seats in urban areas, but its members paid for it. Amir-backed enforcers responded with beatings, arrests, and destroyed property, and Kano himself was imprisoned and placed under surveillance. The setbacks kept coming at the ballot box too. In 1954, he lost his federal House seat to Maitama Sewell, and in 1956, he couldn't gather enough votes to win a seat in the Northern Regional Assembly. The movement was growing in the streets faster than it was winning in the polls. In 1959, Nigeria held its first election with direct voting in every constituency. Running under a NEPA and CNC alliance, Kano won the Kano East seat with just over 60% of the vote, and became Deputy Government Chief Whip in the Federal House of Representatives. He turned down a ministerial appointment, calling it unseemly to accept a position of prestige without real power while roughly 2,000 of his own party's followers were sitting in prison. Through the early 1960s, Kano used his position as a parliamentarian and a Nigerian delegate to the United Nations to push for decolonization elsewhere in Africa and a non-aligned foreign policy for Nigeria itself. After the coups of 1966 ended civilian government, he took a post in Yakubu Gowon's military administration as Federal Commissioner for Health. By the time NEPA's long fight had run its course, its effects were measurable. Talakawa were no longer required to farm feudal land without pay. Regressive levies like the community tax and the cattle tax were abolished. Access to education and political office widened well beyond the traditional ruling class NEPA had spent 3 decades organizing against. In 1977, Kano served as a delegate to the Constituent Assembly that drafted Nigeria's new constitution for the return to civilian rule. In 1978, he rebuilt NEPA's base into the People's Redemption Party. In the 1979 election, he ran for president and lost to Shehu Shagari, but the PRP still won the governorships of both Kano and Kaduna states. In 1983, he chose Bola Ogunbo as his running mate, the first woman on a presidential ticket in Nigerian history. He died on April 17, 1983, before that year's election took place. NEPA had put women's rights on its platform from the very beginning, decades before Aminu Kano picked a woman as his own running mate. He wasn't the only one doing that kind of organizing in this era, and he wasn't even the most radical. In the Western region, at almost the exact same time NEPA was forming, a schoolteacher was building a women's movement of her own, one that would go all the way to forcing a king off his throne over an unjust tax. Next time, we cover Funmaleo Ransom Kuti.